Well, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this ISM Trust webinar on differing barriers between primary and secondary singing. This webinar is, of course, part of the ISM Trust's Breaking the Singing Barrier resource, which is, for those of you who don't know, a series of webinars and videos to help music teachers understand, explore, and overcome the barriers to singing that exist for children, young people, and adults of all cultures and backgrounds. And the resource really aims to help you create a safe space for singing. I'm Charles Bickignon MacDougall, and to describe myself, I'm a white man with blonde, highlighted hair. I'm wearing a dark green t-shirt and I've got a pair of tortoiseshell spectacles. I'm at home in my flat in East London. I'm sitting at my desk, and confusingly for some, there's a mirror behind me, as well as a bookcase full of files and folders. I'm a singer, choral director, vocal coach, and music education consultant, and it is a great privilege for me to be chairing this webinar today. Now, some of you will know me as the former choral director of the Voices Foundation, leading on choral pedagogy and programs there, or possibly from another previous role, such as vocal ensembles coach at Junior Trinity. Both roles, of course, really primed me to be particularly interested in today's discussion. And of course, I've recently been appointed as one of the two creative directors of Gabriele Raw, which is part of the Gabriele Concert and Players, the program that takes a bold stance on the ability of young singers, where we challenge them to perform side by side with our professional musicians and immerse them in Gabriele's performances and recordings. You may have even seen in the news recently that we're aiming to reach 30,000 young people over the next 5 years. No mean feat. Now, when we started to work with the idea of these webinars with the ISM, I was really excited by the prospect of gathering together a bit of a dream panel, dream team for this subject. And I'm really pleased to say that's absolutely what we have here today. I feel a bit like it's Christmas for me. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Martin Ashley, author and expert in musical learning and boys' understanding of voice. Lucy Hollins, conductor, presenter, writer, and composer, and Margaret O'Shea, head of creative and extended curriculums for ARC schools. And you're going to meet them in just a minute. But before we begin the webinar properly, there's just a few things to note. Firstly, during the presentation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function rather than the chat. We'll do our best to answer these at the end, but please do keep an eye on the chat box as well, where throughout the team will be dropping some useful links for you. Now, if you experience any technical difficulties, do let us know in the chat box and we will do our best to resolve them. And if you'd like to use them, subtitles are available to enable right at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you afterwards, as well as, very importantly, a feedback survey, which we'd be really grateful if you could fill out. It really helps us to know what our next steps are and what the need is out there, what people are interested in. The ISM Trust is the ISM's sister charity, which offers high quality professional development to everyone working in music. Through the Trust, the ISM gives back to the sector and supports and empowers music professionals to succeed. The Trust produces award-winning events, training, and resources, which are largely completely free to access. Please do consider supporting the work of the ISM Trust. You can become a friend, you can make a donation, or by leaving a legacy. Any support you can offer is truly appreciated. Now, I'm very, very pleased, as I said, to introduce you to our panelists. I'd like to invite them to introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Martin, and then I know you're going to hand over. Martin.
Okay, right. Well, to describe myself, I'm a white male with a beard and grey hair, which is a consequence of the fact I've been retired for quite a long time. So I'll say no more about that. I'm a retired professor of education. I trained initially as a middle school music specialist. I taught in schools for 17 years and then another 17 years in university teacher training departments. I spent 25 years researching the adolescent voice, of which 10 of those years have been in retirement. It's amazing how you can really work in retirement without wretched admin and all the other silly things that get in the way of the interesting bits. Much of what I know comes from watching the most successful teachers at work, which is a privilege that comes from a position as a researcher in an education faculty. So that's me by way of introduction. I've been asked to highlight initially my top 3 barriers, and they are: in primary schools, a lack of any training and preparation of teachers, of generalist classroom teachers. In secondary schools, it's a combination really of changing voices. I would say that, wouldn't I, if you know my work? Boys' attitudes, well, in fact, all student attitudes really, and vocal identity, which I'll talk about later. And in both sectors, there's a huge barrier in terms of whether the senior management are behind what you want to do. That is a mega barrier, in my experience, to both sectors. And maybe above the senior management, there are tiers of government, which can also be a barrier if they're not supporting what we want to do in singing. So that's me and my top 3 values. I have got a slide I want to show later that I'm calling the barriers behind the barriers, but let me shut up. And Charles, you're going to introduce the next person.
I can certainly do that. Thanks, Martin. Let's go over now to Lucy.
Hello, everyone. It's fantastic to be here today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have over the next hour or so. To describe myself, I'm a white woman with brown hair, which is tied back. I'm wearing a chunky brown jumper, and my background is blurred so that you can't see the mess in my house this afternoon. So a little bit about me. I am the creative director of the National Youth Choirs. So very much involved in getting young people singing there, and we do an awful lot of work beyond the choirs themselves, trying to engage young people and support teachers and singing leaders in getting young people singing. Beyond that, I'm a person very, very actively still as a freelancer, person that loves to make music happen and make people feel good. So I'm a conductor originally. I trained as an orchestral conductor, but now work predominantly with choirs. I'm also a concert presenter for family and key stage concerts, a workshop leader and music educator. Coming out of that, I started now writing a lot of songs, and I recently wrote a book as well called How to Make Your Choir Sound Awesome, and have a mission to go around making everyone sound awesome. And I'm going to hand over now to Margaret O'Shea.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Margaret. I'm a white Irish woman with dark hair and blue eyes. I'm wearing a red scoop neck top this evening and a hand-woven gold necklace by an Irish designer. I'm here in my flat this evening, and behind me is a piece of art by a street artist called Solace, called The Boxing Ballerinas. As Charles said, my current role is as head of extended and creative curriculums for ARC schools. We're a multi-academy trust working in 4 areas, so in London, Birmingham, Portsmouth and Hastings, all in areas where we believe we can make the most difference, and we serve 30,000 children and their families. My role is quite far-reaching. I started as director of music for ARC schools, so building and creating, establishing and leading a wide-ranging music education program in response to many of the challenges that I'm sure we'll talk about this evening, and have recently grown that work to include more cultural program offers, sports, personal development, and lots of other things besides. So that's a little bit about me. I'm delighted to be here this evening.
Well, thank you, Lucy and Margaret. That's great. Now, now we've met everybody, Martin's given the game away on the next thing we want to do, and he's told us his top 3 barriers that he perceives are lack of training of generalist teachers at primary, at secondary, changing voices, boys' attitudes, or attitudes of all students, and also issues of vocal identity. And then he said across both, senior management, senior leadership being behind what you do, understanding what you do, and then even perhaps tiers of government. So I suppose what I'd like to do is ask Lucy to follow up on that, Lucy and Margaret to follow up on that, and what do they think, what do they perceive the top 3 barriers that they know of? And I don't know which one of you wants to go first. You can dive in. And Martin, you can pop your camera back on, because I think we're going to start having a bit of discussion now. So.
Shall I dive in, Margaret? I'll dive in. Quite similar, I think, not surprisingly, perhaps. It was really interesting thinking about these barriers and kind of brainstorming what they are, and then quite difficult, I found, reducing them down. But what I've come up with is, in the primary sector, a lack of initial teacher training for people in music and the impact that has. In secondary, the sort of lack of value placed often in music, and sort of being squashed out of the curriculum by STEM subjects. And then the third one was what I battled with this one, but I think for me there's something really important, which is across both primary and secondary, about the lack of understanding and a focus on the value of making music beyond the curriculum. So music as a tool for personal development, self-confidence, building communities, etc. And a lack of value placed in that, maybe perhaps sometimes a lack of understanding in all those benefits beyond studying music as a subject.
Thanks, Lucy. So when I think of the barriers, I agree with you. It was a great question to be asked, because I think it's quite a funny thing. So in my role, I have the great privilege of traveling around the country and seeing firsthand what is the most fabulous UK youth culture in music and in otherwise, and beyond. I meet wonderful children and young people every day who love to sing, who love to vocalize in their different ways. And I know that talent is everywhere. But I also know that a huge barrier is sustained and connected access to whatever type of vocal music you want to make. And an access that resonates and that grows with you as your interests shift and change. That's, as I said, is sustained over time and is just readily available. So for me, access is number one. That comes in lots of different ways. But I say that sustained access, which shifts, which changes, which looks like lots of different things to lots of different people, feels like a massive barrier in my setting. I would agree with the panelists about other challenges within a school system and within value placed beyond kind of core metrics. But for me, access, number one, and that diverse range of access points is, I think, is the primary challenge for us.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Lucy, and thanks, Martin. Really, there's lots of things that are in common there, aren't there? We've heard multiple times now, lack of training for generalists, lack of value attached to music compared to other subjects, lack of understanding of the value of music making, and then also that Margaret's finishing there with access. So I wonder if we can start to perhaps offer some solutions immediately, that having seen those barriers, what are the potential solutions? What can be done to how can they be addressed? What are the solutions from your perspectives?
Charles, would this be a good time just to show my barrier behind the barriers?
Please, Martin, please.
Yeah, I think I'll just show that one slide, if that's all right. Otherwise, I'll end up taking over the whole thing, which I certainly don't want to do. I reread the book I wrote, Singing in a Lower Secondary School, and I've been doing this for a long time. And without sounding old and cynical, these things just come round and round and round. So I really wanted to get behind, which is not a moan about lack of teacher training. It is more, why aren't we training teachers? Now, I was amazed and delighted that Lucy also mentioned value. The title of my PhD thesis was actually Value as a Reason for Action. And we can talk till the cows come home, but if we do not address the value of music, singing, and music education, teachers are never going to be trained. Kids are never going to like it. So I would hope we'll have some ideas on what I'm saying here. To value something is to prioritize it. There's no getting away from this. And when we prioritize a value, what we say is X and Y and Z and A and B are important, but getting singing right is more important. And if you cannot say that, the kids are not going to sing, period. And they haven't been singing in a lot of schools for an awful long time, as we know. That's my evidence. Identity is a top priority for pupils. And you've really got to engage with what's going on in the kids' minds. Who or what is creating the identity of singer in their minds? And how do you create alternative identities for school music that they will be happy with? Because if you don't make the pupils happy with their identity, so they enjoy who they are in a music lesson, they're going to hate singing. Now, the third one might surprise you, but when I reread my book and thought about this and prepared for this, anxiety, there's a whole chapter on it in the book. You've probably heard of maths anxiety. It's why people avoid doing calculations, why people are quite happy to say they were never any good at maths at school, but they would never admit to being poor at English or literacy. Now, children are anxious about singing. If you don't address that, they're not going to sing. And it may also surprise you, but I've got loads of evidence and it's dealt with in the book. Teachers can also be anxious about singing. It's no use just moaning about the fact that primary teachers aren't trained. You might make it even worse if you train them and the training course says you've got to sing to your kids. You'll be surprised at the way teachers conceal their anxiety. And if the teacher is anxious, even though they don't realize they are, this will bounce off the kids and they'll just feel very insecure. And boys in particular will react to that insecurity by trashing the activity. Oh, it's for girls and all the rubbish that boys come up with. Anxiety is at the root of that. Now, I think I'm going to stop screen sharing now. I've got my barriers behind the barriers across. And I don't know whether that's going to help us or not, but I wanted to say that.
I think that's incredibly helpful, Martin. And immediately it makes me want to ask them if we can take the last one before we go back to some of the other things that Lucy and Margaret said. How you've said if we don't deal with the anxiety in both students and teachers. So actually, it seems to me you say that's a barrier behind the barrier. So even before we worry about the training that they're receiving, we need to be addressing the anxiety that they might feel about that. So what are the solutions to that? How do we deal with anxiety around singing in students and teachers?
I've got one solution for teachers, and this solution comes from watching music lessons where I thought this teacher is anxious. There's a lovely little film I made a few years ago of a teacher who is not anxious. And what that teacher does, the very minute year sevens walk into his room for the first time, he has them singing. And there's no time for anybody to think, what, they're singing. Bang, sing, straight away. I absolutely stress that. And you would be amazed. I could tell you stories from the book where teachers just procrastinate. They talk for 20 minutes before any music is made. I've seen this so many times. And they also say things like, well, today we're going to do a little bit of listening and then we're going to do this. And later on, we're going to do some singing. No, you sing at the very beginning of the lesson. Because if you tell the kids that later on they're going to do some singing and they're anxious, they'll sit there thinking, oh my God, we're going to be singing. I hate this. sing at the beginning of the lesson. There you go.
The passion, Martin, is real. We love it.
Oh,
So,
yeah, very passionate.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So Lucy and Margaret, please feel free to comment on that, but how else can we deal with that anxiety that we see in our teachers and our students?
Sure. So for us, this identity issue is very live and a very real one, both across primary and secondary. We have a generation now of teachers who themselves haven't had particularly strong music education. If you think about the average age of either a trainee teacher, or actually if you think about the average age of a principal now, which is scary, super young. So we have kind of a whole ream of the education workforce from kind of grassroots trainee level right up to the senior leadership team who themselves have not necessarily have, if they have a state school background particularly, or if they've coming from some areas in which there would be kind of cultural isolation. And so for us, when we were starting out about 12, 13 years ago, so it's not a new phenomenon, it's been around for at least over a decade. One of the things that we knew we needed to tackle from the very outset was the teacher identity piece. And so for secondary teachers, that's the identity as a musician first and foremost, and as somebody who is unlocking and creating musical environments, and as primary, similarly as a human being who has a creative and musical soul in primary, not somebody who is given this subject to teach that they might not necessarily, that just, as you say, strike fears in their heart. We do that in lots of different ways. So through a really comprehensive training programs that focus fundamentally on singing, through ensuring that curriculum, our whole entire curriculum from the nursery right through, is based on singing, but fundamentally by acknowledging our teachers as creative people. So things like having sing for pleasure sessions for them. So having teacher choirs, having staff choirs that run across our network of schools, by having, for primary and secondary teachers, by having staff sing-along sessions, which we support with our artists. So they're very different. It's not a choir, that's a come-all-ye, kind of come and sing your song. We'll have a keys player there who could support you, or a guitarist. But let's go and have a sing song, and remember that this is a really human, if not the most human act, is to open and it's brave to do that in a professional setting, but like to just really normalize for our teachers what it is to sing, how it feels to sing, and how it feels to connect with others in that way, and then starting to tackle our kind of training programs. So I think for us, certainly that issue of teacher identity is massive, and because as you're absolutely right, Martin, otherwise you come into your classroom and you're bringing those, children are so incredibly sensitive. They can feel when a teacher is uncomfortable. They can feel when a teacher is doing something because they have been told to do it. And so that was really core for us and has been central to our approach over the last decade or so. So hopefully we're creating a workforce who less and less feel fearful of singing and of song, and are willing to get stuck in.
Yeah, get stuck in and do it. That's the thing. There's nothing beats anxiety than doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lucy.
Yeah, really interesting points. And I mean, I agree with all of that. And I think, for me, one of the big questions is about culture more broadly, and it's important not to let me go down this rabbit hole. But there is I've got a 6-year-old son, and I was really shocked when he was a tiny baby that I would go to a baby sensory class, and there were lots and lots of parents there who, when it came to the time to sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, wouldn't sing. They were too embarrassed to sing. And that really shocked me. And of course, I live in a world surrounded by musicians, but so there's something more broadly about culture and people's feelings about singing and their willingness to sing. And I guess, the thing I would hope for primary schools, well, for all schools, but particularly primary schools, is that singing is just part of the culture of the school. And so I think for me, there's two things I'd like to pick up on here, really. And one is, I absolutely agree, singing at the start of the day, just do it. But I would say, actually, it's not even necessarily about having, this is our time for singing, whether it's the start, the middle, or the end. It's about, let's sing to get into a line, let's sing to go to lunch, let's sing to do the register, and all those things, and just trying to normalize singing as a form of communication. It doesn't have to be on a stage, it doesn't have to be with piano, it doesn't have to be in harmony. We can sing just as a means of getting something done, and it actually a very efficient means. And then I suppose the other thing that struck me is that in terms of getting people just to do it, I think in professional organisations, Charles, for example, you and I often go out and we're delivering CPD for teachers and things. It's really important that as professional organisations, we're not making assumptions about people, because I think it's so easy, for any of us on this panel today. I'll very happily sing to you at any time at all. Just tell me to do it and I'll do it. Give me a subject and I'll do it. But actually, I think it's worth just taking a moment to recognise the kind of the broader implications. Actually, if people aren't willing to sing to their babies in a public setting a lullaby, what's it then like when you're in a context where you're a professional and you've got lots of people looking at you expectantly, and people find it scary. And absolutely, we don't want that to be the case, but at the moment that is. So I think it's just really important for any professional organisations and people who are delivering training to recognise that as a real problem for lots of teachers, and actually work with is a very sort of gently approach to get them singing, because it's not something that everyone is used to doing in the way that perhaps we on this call are.
I was delighted really that Lucy brought up this thing of parents being embarrassed to sing Twinkle, Twinkle. I mean, the decline in singing culture. I mean, I'm an organist, or used to be, and there was a time when I played for 4 weddings every Saturday afternoon. God help me, that was a long time ago. But a long time ago, people knew the hymns and they sang. Now I pity people who are organists, because nobody sings because they're all too embarrassed and they don't know the hymns, and it's all part of this culture. And one of the things that I think is responsible for that is it comes to identity. If you go back to when I was a boy, which is a very long time ago, we had steam trains then, everybody sang in assembly, everybody sang all the time. It wasn't a problem. But who are the people who sing now? They're the people who are talent show wannabes. Now, I've seen teachers completely mess up singing by getting the kids to watch Britain's Got Talent and do their own song at the next music lesson. I think all children, but boys in particular, absolutely fearful of being judged. Now, if they're all singing together, like we used to, you take away that judgment. If you have the talent show mentality, you put judgment in capital letters, and the children are just not going to want to do it, because unless they're talent show wannabes, and this is true of boys actually, if you've got 3 boys who sing out of a class of 30, I bet you all 3 of those boys like performing. The other 27 hate it. So I think you've got to deal with that as well, that aspect of identity.
Martin, you've managed to actually answer a question that just appeared while you were speaking, which was, do we think that programs like The Voice, Britain's Got Talent, and 24/7 instant access to stream music, not just for famous bands, also put people off because they feel they can't match that kind of standard? So you're touching on that there. I think that's...
Can I repeat my answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I feel quite differently, well, not quite differently, but I think that all of that mainstream and like having music in whatever its form on mainstream television at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night to an audience of millions is a great privilege that we have. I think that to be able to engage in a range of musics on Spotify literally like on your phone, to be able to pick it up and find any type of music you could possibly want, and often for free if you've got like Wi-Fi access or something and you can cope with the ads. I think that is magnificent. And the same with YouTube. I think that with our youth culture, them having that easy access is creating a generation of really engaged musicians. I think that looks a little bit different to how it might have in the past. I think we are getting more and more people who are wanting to be soloists not necessarily wanting to be in our traditional choirs or ensembles. And maybe that's something we need to look at, is how relevant they are for their interests. But I think that access is something that we shouldn't, like, for us, that platforming of music as an art form and kind of on the main stage is a real privilege, and that ease of access is fantastic, and something we need to work better at mobilizing and at capturing the imagination. Because I see, as I said, a youth culture that is singing all day, every day, that is obsessed with music, that like is living for music and song within that, just maybe in a different form to how it has been in the past.
That's quite a golden thing to acknowledge, isn't it, Margaret? That actually, and I think there's something to be said for a conversation. Well, who's Gesualdo? We'll get a load of this. Who's Cecilia MacDougall? Get a load of this. You know, and the way that it can be shared. But there's food for thought about the type of musician that's being promoted, perhaps, as you said there. Lucy, what do you think about that?
I mean, on different days I could make an argument in either direction. I think my overwhelming feeling is that we're talking about music. Music is massive. Music is broad. Music is worldwide. Music is sort of so many different things, and I do think that a lot of this is about helping people to find their thing. And I'm conscious that even when I'm say working with a choir of people with similar backgrounds, for example, I can never please everyone. Someone will always tell me off for one of my repertoire choices, and I think so more broadly speaking, Margaret's point about actually being able to just find anything is really, really important, because it means that we're able to find the thing that we love. And it may be that you listen to some rap and you go, oh, that's not my thing, and then you hear some country and western, you're like, I love it, whatever it might be. And actually, also by having sort of all these different things available to you, what that also means is that you're going to be seeing lots of different people that you might or might not identify with making music. And I think that sort of idea of the role models is also so important in inspiring young people. So from that sort of access point of view, I think it's a really wonderful thing. I also take on the point that sort of there's a little bit of, oh, I can't sing like that, but hopefully the point of these TV programs is that actually people can sing like that, and it's about having a go, and it's about exposure to it and trying and working hard and all these things. So I agree both ways, I think, if that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's this problem with social media, isn't it? It's good and it's bad, and we have to use it intelligently and empathetically, I would say. Let me give you the evidence, or some of the evidence for what I say. I mean, when I first started the work I'm doing, I was saying boys don't sing. Actually, that's not true. Boys love singing, but when I speak to boys in school about singing, they say, yes, I sing in the bathroom or in my bedroom where my dad can't hear me. And I have had so many responses like that I'm convinced that boys do harbour this fear of being judged. So we've got to overcome that fear. And I would say singing, having them all singing together and not judging them is the starting point. Now, the other thing, I mean, I've just recorded a podcast or series of podcasts with a young man by the name of Cormac Thompson. Google him. He is one of these superstar treble singers, or was, and he's talking about his experience at school and what the other kids think of him. And it's a very interesting podcast. I'll tell you what they think of him. They think he's an opera singer. Because he is an accomplished singer, they define him as an opera singer. Next thing is they don't like opera. So really, you have got to look at the experience of children and what children are saying as a starting point. So yeah, like Lucy, we can take it both ways, but we've got to manage social media creatively and sensitively.
I'm gonna nudge us on in a slightly different. We could go off in so many different directions, but I just something to pick up on the idea of we're talking there about knowing how to approach boys singing, for example. And we've also mentioned earlier the idea of the fear that kicks into, the anxiety that kicks in with teachers when they are maybe asked to sing. And Lucy was saying, you know, we take that for granted. Of course we do. You're singing from the rooftops all day, every day. So something that I've certainly found, we're touching on it here, is that idea that it's asset-based training that teachers need, isn't it? It's starting in a place of their expertise and recognizing their expertise and the weight that comes with that tremendous experience they have and their knowledge of their students. And they have all of that. So my question is, what is the bit of the training, therefore, that's missing? Because we've talked about lack of teacher training, certainly for our generalist primary teachers leading music. So we know these teachers arrive with this incredible experience, incredible skill set to manage classrooms, to plan lessons, to be engaging, to have charisma, and to connect with their students. So what is it that's missing, and how do we tackle that? Let's get back to some solutions.
I can give you an immediate answer to that. It's knowledge of changing voices, certainly in secondary schools. Now, exactly the point you make, Charles, I've been into schools and I've been invited in where the music teacher is very skilled, very good at all sorts of things. He's just not cutting it with the boys. So a session on puberty, adolescence, the voice, the different stages of voice change that go through, and that teacher is then upskilled, and you find a month later he's got a fantastic voice choir. And this is a doable if all you need to do is supply the missing knowledge about the singing ranges for boys at different stages of puberty, and there's plenty of information available about that, and there'll be links sent out with this, you know, stuff I produced. That is, I agree with what you're saying, Charles. We've got teachers who are incredibly skilled in all sorts of ways, brilliant at organising, brilliant at discipline, great teachers. The thing they're lacking, because they've never been taught it, or they've been taught wrongly when they were at school, is how voices change during puberty. And that starts on day one in year 7, because most boys coming into year 7 are beginning puberty if they haven't already.
Thanks, Martin. So I saw Lucy scribbling notes. I'm gonna say, I can see you scribbling away, Lucy.
I'm
so
scribbling too.
No. I mean, it's interesting as well. You know, I've been having some really interesting conversations recently with colleagues as well about vocal change that girls experience in puberty. This is a hugely unexplored area. But the thing I was thinking about was specialist knowledge, because absolutely, Martin, secondary level, you know, it's so valuable to have that knowledge. For me, it's important that at primary level, as you say, Charles, the teachers are experts. They know their pupils inside out. They've got everything they need right there, really. For me, it's something about how to normalise singing, because I think that some of the best music leads I've worked with in primary schools are not trained singers, you know, and I don't think you have to be a trained singer to be a really fantastic music lead. I think it's about doing it and kind of modelling your passion for it, and creating that culture. So I'm not sure I have the answer to the question of how we normalise singing, but I suppose I just wanted to make the point that you don't have to be a trained singer. You don't have to have that sort of vast background in it. You just have to do it. And so if there's a way to kind of make it feel it's just part of what we do as an extra tool in the kit, rather than as something totally separate. And I suppose there's a problem, isn't there, more broadly with perceptions, particularly when people think about classical music, perhaps Western classical music, about that being something separate that some people do and other people don't. And actually what we need to do is take it right back to that kind of the culture, the tribal behaviour, the ritual, something that we do together communally. But Margaret, do you know how? Do you know how to do that? Pass it on to you.
Pass the buck. Excellent work, Lucy.
You might have I have some ideas on how to do that. But just coming back to the question about training, I think there's also a piece around providers of training having fluency and understanding of the language in which schools speak. And that will be as music as a curriculum object within itself. And so it will be music. What does progression look like in music as a curriculum? I'm talking about in primary at the moment. well, secondary too, but I'm starting with primary. So, and where does singing sit within that? So where are your building blocks towards an outcome? And this is all the language that schools use. And I think if we're supporting with real intentionality, wanting to support teachers in schools, we need to have a level of fluency around that language as well, to help them make that jump, because what they don't have is the time to do that deep curricular thinking in the way that musicians have for many, many years and music educators have. And that is also why we're seeing a real lack of criticality around schemes and what's happening in schools, is because we're, again, that's a gap that we have in generalist. And often people will buy in a scheme, they'll buy in somebody to come and deliver stuff. And what we don't then have is, as I say, that criticality about what impact is it having? What is the quality of singing looking like, and how is that developing over time? How are we where is the role of the classroom teacher within that? And kind of, as I say, just really hanging it on the language that we use in schools, rather than it's every hurdle that they have to make, right, makes it a little bit further away for them. So every jump that they need to take to translate something. And I think, you'll often have training fantastically facilitated and fantastically delivered, and people generally kind of like, I can see like a little bit in how I can take that back to school, but actually my whatever scheme it is I'm doing, and kind of not really knowing how it's instantly applicable. So for me, there's something about it being incumbent upon us to develop the expertise kind of at a curricular level in the curricular domain, for teachers. But the normalizing singing, I just want to also just echo that point around, we have an absolutely fantastic killer network of primary music leads, and not one of them is a singer, or certainly wouldn't be like a classically trained singer, or they're all singers. And they, for sure, after having had that role with me, they absolutely count themselves as singers. But that isn't what has to make a great leader of singing. It doesn't, certainly in a school, it's not what you have to be a great music lead. You've got to have real passion, insight, and commitment. And the singing will, your own singing will come after it. But yeah, I agree. It's, and it's also not realistic in schools, and to be expecting that to be, unfortunately. But
can I follow up that point, actually? I mean, first of all, I am not a singer. Choirs tolerate me and have done for many years, but I'm not a singer. But that hasn't stopped me teaching singing to kids, far from it. But I want to come back to this thing that this Charles raised about teachers are highly skilled in all sorts of ways. Now, perhaps this is an anecdote, but when I taught the PGCE music, I used to give sessions on the changing voice, and the students were massively enthused by it. Then the next week afterwards, they came back quite often depressed. And one student I remember in particular, my teacher won't let me do it because there'll be discipline problems. Now, the serious issue there is that in secondary schools, once you're into year 8 and certainly year 9, the kids are all over the places with their voices, and unison singing really isn't going to work, because it'll either be too low for the girls, too high for the boys. So you're then into, well, do we, sectional rehearsals on a Friday afternoon music class? This is where the skill, the organizational skill of teachers can supplement the knowledge of what's happening to a boy when he goes through to the next stage of voice change. So I want to make that point, really, that you've got to combine all sorts of different knowledges.
Thanks, Martin. Anyone want to respond to that?
See, we've got a hand up.
I'm not sure quite how we deal with that on the webinar setting. I would have to be advised. I think the questions need to go in the into the Q&A for us to be able to answer them in the webinar. So, that seems like a good point, actually, to move on to some of our questions, because we've got them coming in on the Q&A, but we also had some in advance. So I suppose, first of all, one of the questions we received was asking about the impact of peer group influence on engagement with music and uptake or commitment. Margaret, you're nodding furiously. So do you, I'm going to dive over to you. What does that make you think?
Oh, it's just everything. I mean, it's what Martin talked about at the very beginning about anxiety, about identity. Peer group is everything. But I will also say that I don't know a group of young people who haven't recognized when somebody is passionate and interested in something as being a good thing. So I think that is kind of, just we often hear stories about people being bullied or whatever, and I think for every one of those stories there's probably many others where young people are incredibly supportive of each other and their interests. But was the question particularly around boys in a boys' school? Was that?
No, it was general, just on peer group influence on engagement with music.
And I think this is where, in my context anyway, where pupil voice and engagement is massive. And so you will always have your sense of what you want for your group. So like you say, unison singing is probably not going to be the best starting point if you want to like something that feels really satisfying with a mixed bag of voices. But you should be confident enough in your own practice to know that you can pick repertoire that is relevant and interesting to your young people, and still find pedagogical outcomes from it. And I think that kind of having a collective in your group, your class, your ensemble, who are bought into the repertoire, whatever that is, that might be musical theatre, that might be art song, that might be duets from who knows, that might be kind of a spoken word to start out with that kind of flows into a flow, that flows into a spit, that could be, what is it, who knows, let's find out. But that peer engagement starting from a core mobilized group who feel like they're being seen, heard and responded to and growing out, it's so infectious. It's just so infectious. And that is probably the ways in which I have seen, if you're starting kind of from a standing start, I would say if you haven't had the beauty of a prep school or you haven't had a junior school, and so that you really are starting at year 7 with children from all over with all sorts of different backgrounds, just start, as we said, meet them where they're at. What is the music they like to sing? What is popular in your community and with your culture? And trying to take it. And that could also be football chants. That could be anything, right? That could be, who do we follow? Do we have 2 key teams? Let's learn their anthems. But what is it? Not to be extremely stereotypical, apologies for talking about football when we're thinking about this, but but it is sometimes it is the obvious things that are the easy answers or the correct answers.
Thanks, Margaret. Does anyone want to add to that?
Lucy, did you want to say anything? Because I want to jump in, but I don't want
No,
to.
after you, Martin.
Yeah, okay. Well, that does prompt me to say I'd sort of prepared an answer to this question because it had been sent in. Children have their own musical culture, and we're not part of it. A mistake that we can make is trying to second guess what's cool and be cool, and there's nothing less cool than that. What I've suggested, is a mutually acceptable repertoire. Meet the kids halfway, and a network of teachers, I'm sure, will give all sorts of ideas for what's worked well, but it isn't what the kids want to play in their own free time. That can take you down a blind alley. And the really key point here is that school music must teach them something. If all you do is sing, the head will say, or may say, well, music can be cut because it's just entertainment. And the kids will say that. Believe me, I've researched this, I've talked to loads of children, it's true. They want to learn. And if they do not learn something from the singing they've just done, that's no good. Children have got to think, I learned something there. Because they do expect to learn at school. It's not entertainment.
Thanks, Martin.
I would argue it's even more than that, though. National Youth Choir, for example, which is obviously a very different setting. But what we hear an awful lot of the time is, oh my goodness, I found my people, I found my tribe, I found a place where I can be me. I found a place where I can express myself, where I'm comfortable. And, you know, I associate that as in my own experience of music, and not being someone who fitted in and then finding my tribe. And I think that's just a really important thing to keep in mind as well. And, you know, there will be people who aren't into it, and that's okay. But actually kind of that thing of finding the people with whom you can be yourself and express yourself is also, for me, one of the most valuable things about what we do.
Finding tribes is so important. I was in a queue to go into a National Youth Choir concert a couple of years ago, and I was surrounded by parents who were saying, he loves coming to the National Youth Choir, more or less your words, Lucy. He's found his tribe. Now, how can you help children find their tribe in school without going to the National Youth Choir? There's a question.
I will give people a little time to think on that one, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd love to jump to one of the questions now in the Q&A, and I'm just going to read that out to you. When I was in primary school in the 1980s, singing served as part of the morning ritual. It encouraged us all to be on the same page, singing from the same hymn sheet. Singing also helped us learn in all subjects, from learning ABCs to encoding mnemonics. Is there a way to embed music in primary school teaching to make it a daily, useful part of culture?
Yes.
Music is the only reason I passed my physics GCSE, because I sang all the equations. And then I sang them in my head in the exam. But I mean, for me, there's something about, I mean, yes, absolutely. For me, it's part of kind of the daily ritual. That's almost the more important thing. If you can have a choir in your school, brilliant. But if you can sing to help people get into a line or tidy up or learn a language or learn anything, then for me, that's a hugely wonderful way to use music as a tool in learning.
Yeah, I would agree. A while ago, there was something very popular called Brain Gym, and they used to have to do all sorts of funny things. I don't know if they still do it, but yeah, that's the one. But I thought, why do you need Brain Gym? If the kids are getting phased out by the middle of the maths lesson in a primary school, stop the maths for 10 minutes and sing, because that will release their minds. When they've sung for 10 minutes, they'll be better at their maths again. So yes, there are all sorts of ways that with imagination we can make singing part of daily life.
Or better still, Martin, we're talking about the toolkit of teachers and the assets that they bring. If the teachers know the Brain Gym and they know the PE warm-ups, then that is their singing warm-up for me. It's like, well, do that. Start with that. We'll get onto the voice later on when we've addressed where you are with that and what songs you know and how happy you are to sing in front of your peers and your students. But if you know Brain Gym, then you jolly well get it into your warm-up, because it is, you know, when we look at what's going on behind warm-ups, actually it's all the same stuff. So I would say, pull that in, use that. That's your toolkit. We're talking about how do we address the training needs. So much of teachers' knowledge is already there. I often find what it is about highlighting, that's actually part of a singing warm-up, or that's actually a rehearsal technique. You just call it classroom management. So I had to dive in there. I got very excited. We're talking about warm-ups, Lucy. We could go for days, couldn't we? Margaret, I probably interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, I suppose there are lots of schools who are singing every day. There are lots of primary schools around the country. There are lots of schools within multi-academy trusts, or other multi-academy trusts like ours, who have a commitment to singing every day. And so there is kind of info online if you look around about how people do that and the ways in which they do that, whether that is either through cross-curricular links or through behavior management. There are various little ditties that they have. So if you walk into any one of our schools, you're likely to hear the same kind of calls ringing around the corridors. Or it might be like we have, which is also a commitment to actually kind of making music in a learning capacity every day as well. So there's lots of really great practice out there in schools. There are many schools who are enlightened and who are pursuing that goal. And so just you have a Google, and I'm sure you will find ways. Or absolutely get in touch with me, and I'm really happy to share. anything
It does come back to the question of values that we started with. One of the things that's depressed me about primary education over the last 20 years is the way it's all gone literacy and numeracy. And if the children aren't literate or numerate enough, the answer is more literacy and more numeracy. It isn't. It's singing and brain gym and warm-ups and whatever you like. It's a break from the intensive focus on phonemes or whatever. And you've got to convince your head that actually that is a valuable break, and the head's got to be behind it, and it's got to happen in as many classrooms as possible.
I'm just going to pick up on a question that's just come in as well. How important do you think it is for pupils to sing as they get into year 7? And I'm going to start to answer that one myself, to give everyone a little breath, a moment for breath, which is, it's probably the most important thing, because we're talking about
first half term of year 7. First half term is the most important.
Absolutely. But we're talking about, you know, how do we aid progression and transition? And also, how does singing become part of identity, and how does singing become part of your values? Well, if it's something that happens from day one and that everybody does it, and where schools get this right, you know, you can see that every pupil has the opportunity to sing in every year group. And in secondary schools, people say to me, well, secondary school kids won't sing. Well, we all know that's not true. But, you know, when people have asked, can I have a program in year 9? Yes, you can, but I would prefer to do one in year 7. And then you can roll that out every successive year, and then develop one for year 8 and develop one for year 9. So now you've got a year 7, a year 8 and a year 9 program going. Suddenly we have tenors and basses in our school chamber choir, and we have lots of people singing through vocal transition, and singing becomes valued, it becomes part of school culture, and it becomes a thing that everybody does from day one. So my answer to that question is yes, the first thing that happens. And it links to, you know, my answer to the previous question as well. How do you make it part of the daily culture? Well, the answer is in the question, isn't it? It has to happen every day from the word go, and it can in primary. That's harder in secondary, but definitely from day one. I don't know what everyone else thinks about that. That just
Charles,
really spoke to me, that question.
Right. You are absolutely the most right person on the planet at the moment.
I'll have that in quotes, please.
Didn't I say this earlier? This very second a child walks into the year 7 music class for the first time. Listen, if the kids don't sing in year 7, you're stuffed. You've lost it. Year 7 is the most important year for getting this going. It absolutely is.
So, guys, we've got about 2 minutes left. So this is going to be rapid fire. We're going to have some gut responses, please. So, Martin, I feel like you're going to dive into this, but I think everybody else probably has something to say. So I'm trying to work on engagement for my school choir at a boys' secondary school where sports and science are top of the agenda. Could you ask how I approach this? I'm trying to work engagement on my school choir where sports and science are top of the agenda. How should I approach this? What's your gut reaction? Let's have some bullet points.
Ask them what they want to do.
Thanks, Lucy.
In the little presentation I've sent that you can circulate afterwards, there is a picture that looks like a rugby team. It's not a rugby team. It's the boys section of the school choir, and they wanted to dress up as rugby for the school calendar. It's both and. But the key to making it work with boys is organize the curriculum so that singing does not clash with sport. That is essential, because they'll 9 times out of 10 they'll put sport first, but if you organize it, they'll do both.
Martin and Margaret, you've got possibly less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, key stage first, as I said, autumn term of key stage of year 7, both curricular and extracurricular are your only man, but also you have the most chance in a single sex school to be able to create a dynamic and a safe environment in which men or boys can sing, as is borne out in lots of different evidence. So I would just say, just get them singing. And yeah, autumn term year 7 choir, rap club, collective, everything under the sun, barbershop, but get them going in both curricular and cross-curricular or extracurricular from September onwards.
Wow, thank you very much, all 3 of you. Now, I think you could tell that we want to answer lots more questions, and can you tell how excited I am to be in a room with the virtual room with these people? Very excited, but I've got to say at that point, thank you very much Martin, Lucy and Margaret for that absolutely banging session on differing barriers between primary and secondary singing. And I know we're just scratching the surface, but it has just been so enriching to have you with us here to get us all thinking. I'm so sorry for all of those questions we haven't answered. I know that some things will be sent out, so hopefully that will answer some of the questions, some of the resources that are coming out. Thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope you found it useful. If you've got further questions, don't hesitate to email us at inquiries@ismtrust.org. I'm sure that email address is likely to appear in the chat any second now, or may have already done so. Please also a plea to fill in the post-webinar survey. It won't take you long. The kettle will be on before you know it. You can find it in the chat and it will be emailed out to you. Your feedback is really appreciated. It helps the ISM Trust to improve their services and to offer more free professional development for everyone out there. The webinar recording will be sent to you by email and also available to watch on the ISM website. I mentioned at the beginning, we'll also send you some useful links that we have shared during this webinar. And our final event in the Breaking the Singing Barrier webinar series is on psychological and personal barriers to singing, and that is on the 15th of May. If you'd like to watch back the SEND barriers to singing webinar and the cultural barriers to singing webinar, that's on the ISM website. And of course, deep breath. And of course, there is also a series of short videos on Breaking the Singing Barrier resource, which you're welcome to explore. I can't promise you're not going to see me there. And Martin, you mentioned advice on changing voices. I think I might have snuck one of those in as well. So thank you again to our wonderful panel, to Martin, to Lucy, to Margaret, to everyone at the ISM. Thank you to all of you for watching, and we hope to see you all again very soon. Goodbye.